Two, three. Welcome back to Speak and Serve. Do you know around 42% of all marriages will unfortunately result in breakup? What a positive way to start. Today we're going to talk about communication. The way we speak to our significant others will impact on how many percentages of those marriages continue. And I've got a specialist in this field, Vanessa White, who is a divorce and breakup coach. Vanessa, welcome to our podcast video screen today.
Hi, Chris. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, it's a busy time for lots of couples, and sometimes at this busy time of year, we just find there's a little bit of emotional stress in the house or in the family or even other parts of the family. So can you tell me, what is it you do, Vanessa, in terms of your mission?
Yeah, I basically give insights and strategies to individuals in the area of relationships, breakups and divorce. And I have a specialism in domestic abuse. And obviously I see a lot of people who are going through that, which adds a whole other dimension to the situation. But I see people before, during and after breakup and divorce. And I find that, there are so many topics that I cover, and I actually obviously listen to what they're going through, but I give them actual insights and strategies so that they can actually move forward from where they are to a better place.
First off then, in terms of relationships, why is it that poor communication can result in breakup?
I think, I like to think that a relationship is kind of one long conversation, actually. So, we are never kind of stopping communicating with our partner. Life gets in the way. We all kind of have a lot of stuff going on, jobs, children, maybe elderly parents, maybe, our past relationship history that comes into play, the way we saw our parents communicate. There's all this stuff that kind of comes into play. And, very often at the end of the day, when people are tired, people have had enough, they've talked all day at work, the last thing they want to do is actually really communicate with their partner. And time goes on where we just kind of lose that sort of interest in our partner in the way that we did when we were dating. If you think when you're dating, you ask so many questions of the other person and they ask so many questions of you, you're sort of interested in learning more about each other. And obviously as you get to know each other better, that kind of goes because you know each other. But there's always something to kind of learn about our partner and where they're at in life. And I think we lose that ability to just be interesting and interested, which then affects general communication. And because we make a lot of assumptions that the other person knows us so well, so I'm not going to bother telling them this, or I'm not going to bother telling them about that at work. Not because we're trying to keep secrets, but we just think they won't be interested or they already know it or, whatever. So that plays a part. On a much more deeper level where we've got real big issues to talk to our partner about, there's all sorts of things that come into play there. And I think we very often either don't want to upset our partner, or we think they won't understand, or when we've told them something previously that's been quite major to us, they've reacted in a way that we didn't find helpful or kind, or they didn't listen to us, and so we don't bother again. We think, well, I'm not going to do that again. Or we just actually are drifting apart from our partner and we just don't want to tell them things anymore that are really meaningful for us. And obviously if that goes on, that is a problem in a relationship.
That word assumptions you talked about there, it's one of those words, isn't it, that we assume that the other person knows how we're feeling, and yet we actually haven't clarified how we are genuinely feeling. And just to assume that they know, is that sometimes the nub of the issue?
I think unspoken expectations is generally not a good way of being in a relationship, because if we think that our partner understands what we're thinking or what we're meaning, but we're not clear, then that is a problem, because we don't know. Unless we tell them, they don't know what we're thinking or meaning. And I'm a massive one for clarity on every level, actually. I think one of the issues we have in relationships very often is that we actually don't communicate our needs and feelings very often to our partner. And this can start right back, at the start of a relationship. And if we don't communicate our needs and feelings to our partner, they're not going to know what they are, and they can't possibly do anything to try and meet those. And what can happen is we then abandon our own needs because we just think, well, they're not listening to us, or they're not understanding what we need, but we haven't actually ever told them. So that sort of assuming, you build up so many layers of thinking they're thinking this, they're meaning that. But if you just have that conversation, it clears all that away. I also think, if you can't actually express your needs and your feelings to your partner, either because you're frightened of the way they're going to react, or because you feel that you're not listened to, then that is a problem in the relationship, and you want to be really aware of that. We should feel comfortable, even if it's something we think they're not going to want to hear. We should feel comfortable enough with our partner and safe enough to be able to tell them things.
I'm a great believer when I'm working with people to give them tools or frameworks of how to use our voice and our communication in a powerful and impactful way. So let's just say we've got that example of assuming that the other person is aware of how we're feeling. How can we ask a question, or how could we frame a question that gets rid of any uncertainty about assumptions, Vanessa, from your experiential point of view?
So asking a question, if I'm the person who's feeling certain things, do you mean?
Yeah, so let's just say, we're not, but let's just say I'm assuming that you know how stressed or anxious I'm feeling about my job. Actually, you've not expressed any empathy for the fact that I'm feeling stressed and anxious. So how do I give you a question or a statement without it becoming antagonistic or combative in terms of my desire to tell you that actually you don't get me, Vanessa?
I think that's really interesting. And I would say on any level, we want to try and avoid you. So using the you don't understand me, you don't get me, you're not listening, you're never there for me, all that sort of stuff. Because as soon as we go you, that person on the receiving end is like, oh, they're talking to me and I don't like that. So we want to kind of frame it very much of how I'm feeling. So if I was in your shoes, and you could say, I am very aware that you're really busy at the moment, and I know that you don't have a lot of time. I would actually just really like to maybe have some space that we could have a little conversation, because I've got some stuff going on for me that I'd really like to talk to you about, and I don't want to just throw it into you when you come in from work and you're really stressed. So can we find a time when we can just have a conversation, and I can tell you a little bit more about how I'm feeling? That gives the other person an opportunity to obviously agree to that. Also, if they weren't particularly aware that their partner was feeling bad in some way, it highlights that, because they're telling them there's some stuff they want to talk about. And they can then say, oh my goodness, I didn't realise that you were feeling so awful, or that there was something going on for you. And look, you can tell me that any time. That's their opportunity to come back straight away with some empathy and some understanding. Or even if they can't do that, at least then they are aware, and they can say, yeah, let's make a time, of course. Why don't we do it later after we've eaten? Or, tomorrow I've got a clear diary, let's do it then. It's giving that opportunity. So that's the kind of way I would frame it. So not going in the you or the criticism, but explaining how you're feeling, where you're coming from, and actually trying to highlight you're going through some stuff and you'd like to talk to them about it.
Just with that in mind then, in terms of getting the time right for communication, I know in a corporate setting, sometimes I talk to a client to say, we almost have to design communication into our weekly meetings or our client meetings. And we actually have almost a strategy meeting where communication is facilitated. Do we need to go to that level as partners to almost diarize in a communication meeting to put this thinking fish on the table?
I know that's what I've just said in that example. I would say no. Obviously, in an ideal world, as I said earlier, we should be communicating. And it doesn't have to be great big sit-down summits, where we're sat across the table and we've got to talk these things through, whatever's worrying us. It should not be like that. And I would say, we're not in a corporate environment. We're in a home, in a family, in a loving romantic relationship situation. hopefully. So no. However, I think if your communication styles are poor with each other and all those things that you just never find time, you're always one's with one kid doing football, one's with the other doing ballet, then you come home, you fall asleep on the sofa, all this kind of stuff going on. And actually, you're not really in a room together where you can have a conversation if it's something that you actually really want to address that's quite significant for you. I think sometimes that is the only option. And it's not about sort of texting, can I have a space in your diary for conversation next Tuesday night? It's expressing that you would like to, but sometimes you do need to put time aside to actually do it, and prioritize it. I think that's what I would say. It's got to become a priority. If it's never a priority and it doesn't naturally happen, I actually think you do need to bring it in consciously as a priority in your relationship.
I really like that prioritization. And also previously you were talking about the fact that just because it's right for me to talk about it now, it might not be right for you. And therefore, can we find a time when we're both thinking about communication together as a priority? I really do support that. Great takeaway there. So let's just say, I don't know, we're 7-8 years. There's that wonderful sort of 7-year itch phrase. And we're finding conflict is happening more and more. And we're almost accepting the fact that this is just where we're at. And we're just, we're two ships moving further and further apart. What would be your advice for somebody perhaps who's listening now and they're finding themselves as two ships that are moving further apart? How can they try to drift back together again?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Obviously, conflict, a natural part, a disagreement and conflict is a natural part of a healthy relationship. And conflict and disagreement is different from domestic abuse. So we need to make that really clear. Those are different things. And all relationships, all couples actually should have disagreement and conflict because you're two different people coming from two different positions. And really, you're not always going to agree on everything. Even if it's what colour towels you buy, you're not always going to agree. So I think it's got to be seen that it's naturally there. I think, again, if it's all conflict, so you see that sometimes where couples are like, oh, we argue all the time and we're always kind of at each other. That also is not good, and we need to try and dial that down. There should be a balance where you can discuss and have disagreements and have conflict, but you can address that, and also you don't get to the stage where you're constantly kind of sniping at each other. When I look at kind of conflict within couples, there's the first thing is where we've learned how we deal with conflict, and we've learned that through experience, very often from our own families when we were growing up. So we've seen our parents dealing with conflict, dealing with disagreements, how they have done all that, how they've handled it together, and that is usually where we've learned how we handle conflict. So if you kind of put it in that perspective, you might have experienced really positive ways of handling conflict, or you might have experienced the complete opposite. And so that's where the two people are coming from. The important thing to think is, first of all, how do you handle conflict and how does your partner handle conflict? Because very often, again, they will be different. And we need to understand, the more understanding we have of that, the more we can find middle ground. And there are lots of ways people handle conflict. Some want to absolutely, they will really shout and be really angry. Others will be this sort of nagging, constant kind of nagging. Others will be snapping all the time, just these snaps. Others will just kind of shut down. So there's lots of ways that individuals will handle conflict. Then on top of that, it's how do we actually resolve conflict? And again, that will very often be different for the two people in the relationship. And unless we understand how we both like to resolve conflict, again, that can cause conflict. Actually, I see this with clients all the time where they have a disagreement about something, but actually what ends up being the difficulty is the way they're then addressing the conflict. And they start, because they handle it in different ways, that becomes the argument. Because one handles it by wanting to go and have some space. They don't want to kind of shout it out. They want to go and have some space, think about it, reflect on it, sleep on it. The other one wants to stay in the room until they've really shouted it out and resolved it and got to the end point. They're two kind of extreme examples of how we resolve conflict. If you've got those two people in a partnership and one wants to go away and have space, the other wants to be there. I've seen it where the one goes away and has space, says, I just want to think about this, I don't want to talk about it right now, we'll come back to it. The other one is following them through the house, going, I want to resolve it now, don't walk away from it. That becomes the conflict then, not the actual original thing they were arguing about. Do you see? So actually, by understanding, you can't change the other person and how they handle conflict or resolve it. But by understanding how you both do that, you can then find some middle ground and some compromise so that it's not one trying to leave the room and the other one following around the house shouting, saying, don't walk away from me, I want to resolve this. And so it's again communicating about that. And you know, that can be around saying, you know, we seem to be arguing a lot at the moment, which I really, really hate. And actually, I've noticed that we kind of want different things when we're arguing. I've noticed that I like to walk away and think about it, whereas obviously, you know, you don't, and you want to kind of really resolve it and kind of shout it out in the room till it's resolved. And I just wondering, you know, we end up arguing about that. And what can we do about it? What do you feel we could do? So actually talking about that, and again, it's not going wrong, you know, you like to shout it out. It's not that. It's that sort of conversation, which is then how you find the common ground so that you can manage conflict in a much more healthy way.
In some of the examples there, I could hear you raising your voice, and also you're maybe using some body language. You're pointing. The adjective of you was there. And I'm a real sort of noticer of communication, body language, nuances, signals. So if we're trying to placate things, we're trying to calm things down, we're trying to find that neutrality of space where it's safe to communicate, how can you give us some tips to sort of disarm the conflict and try to bring it down a level, either by using the tonality in our voice or by using body language that's less confrontational? Any recommendations there, Vanessa?
Just raising the tension, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I agree with you. Non-verbal kind of cues and body language are really important. And I think obviously with our partner, we know them pretty well. We should do. And so we recognize those little cues and when things are escalating for them because we know them. I think it's things like, it's quite simple things in one way of like sitting, not standing. So if somebody if you're both standing and it's getting quite heated, just by simply sitting, you know, by saying, let's go and sit down and talk this through, actually that de-escalates things on a level straight away because you're not sort of one stood confronting the other, which is quite intimidating. And you get a bit of distance between yourselves. You're sitting, which calms things down. It's much more then of you're in a talking locality where you chat. So just something simple like that can really actually help. I think, again, saying, oh, stop shouting at me, that doesn't help. That just inflames people. So we want to kind of avoid that sort of putting physical contact can actually be very useful. And I'm talking about kind, gentle physical contact. But actually, if people are getting quite heated and you love each other, you're in a healthy relationship, generally speaking, actually just touching their arm or reaching for their hand and holding their hand and saying, just kind of putting your arm around them, even actually having a hug, having some physical contact, again, de-escalates because it reminds you that this is your partner who you love. And actually, you're not in a conflict situation. You're not in a work situation, professional situation. This is the person you share your life with. And so actually, showing that small bit of physical contact, again, just reminds us what we're in and reminds us this is the person we love, and often de-escalates things, again, quite naturally. You know, and actually, it's not a problem to say we're getting nowhere with this at the moment, and I really hate us arguing like this. Why don't we, you know, take a break and actually just go and have 10 minutes and let's come back together. And that works a wonder. So although that's obviously not just physical cue, because we're actually speaking about going our separate ways for a little bit of time, often then by distancing yourself, going into another room, going for a walk, coming back together, you're automatically calmer. So when you approach each other again, you go and sit somewhere calm, maybe make a cup of tea, and you talk it out. And very often the issue you were arguing about it's insignificant. And those sort of things can really, really help.
All great advice. I think some of it comes down to the art of listening. So if somebody says, I hear what you're saying, but right now I just need some space to collect my thoughts. That's a very just a directional statement to say, this is what I need for my own sanity, preservation, whatever else. But what happens if the person that receives that just doesn't listen and says, I don't care what you want. Right now, I want to settle this and we're going to get this sorted out because this is what we need to do. An example of not listening and empathetic understanding. Where do we go with that?
I mean, it can be difficult because obviously, as we're talking here, it's easy for us to, give solutions and talk it through. And it's like, but when you're in a heated thing, it's not that easy. And I mean, we know that as, we're people in relationships too. And we understand as people. But I think, it's very much about those skills of remembering the other person, because when we're feeling like we're the hard done by party, it's all we're being got at, we're not being listened to, they're not understanding us, they're shouting at us, or it's just we can't talk to them. So we're the victim here, is how we feel. When we're approaching our partner in that sort of context, obviously immediately that brings some distance between you. But what we want to try and do is actually, again, not blaming the other person. So as soon as we start going into, again, you're doing this or you're doing that, or I've never felt that you've listened to, this is another thing I hear, I've never felt you've listened to me. I know you've never understood me. We put in really quite strong language and statements, never, which of course is not true. But again, that gets people's backs up. So we want to avoid that kind of language. Active listening in couples and listening generally is really interesting, because when we love somebody, we often want to go into problem solving. We want to go into giving solutions. And that's another thing I see, where actually that's not really listening to the person, but because we care, and if we think they're going through some difficulty or they're sad about something, even if it's sad about something we've done, we go into kind of solving the problem, telling them what to do, which is all meant from a lovely place. But actually that's not really listening to somebody, because we may not be able to solve their problem. We may not be able to offer a solution, and they're not necessarily looking for us to. They want us to show that we are listening, which is by letting them talk uninterrupted, acknowledging their feelings, acknowledging their concerns, but not immediately jumping in with a solution and an answer. And, there may not be an answer or a solution, and that is okay. But what they've needed is for you to sit and listen calmly, let them talk, let them express themselves, not judge them, not give your opinion, not solve it. And actually, very often that's enough. And I think that can be really difficult in couples, because you have this thing of wanting to do it, wanting to make it better. And that can impinge on real listening, I think.
Yeah, that statement of you never listen, you've always never listened. It's such a crass generalization. I've almost got a picture of Federer and Nadal on the baseline just swapping great forehands. Right, I'll hit it back and you hit it back, and it's like, oh.
It is, and it's awful, because those kind of statements which you don't actually mean, that's the thing. I mean, yes, occasionally that is going to be what's meant, but often, especially when we're in a heated discussion, we don't mean they've never listened, you've never understood me.
But you just said you never listened to me.
But unfortunately, what the person on the receiving end of that takes away, that will be the bit they take away from that conversation. And I think that, again, we don't really consider that. So we will take away, if I got told that, you've never listened to me, you've never understood me. I know there could have been 200 other things said in that conversation, but I know I will go away from that conversation and reflect on that statement. you've never understood me, you've never listened. And I will think, but I have. And you think that can really affect people. And it's that kind of thing that we throw in. People are human, we throw it out to kind of in conversation. But I think we have to be so careful and considered that we don't use language like that, because it is those takeaways that very often can actually really hurt people, and they're not meant to. Then they haven't been meant in that way.
Also, we don't say them up for later, because I can hear a conversation that says, see, I told you never listened to me. And then, boom, we're straight back into conflict again, aren't we?
Yes.
What about...
It's interesting.
About the two sides of, let's just say it's Vanessa. There's the Vanessa the person, and then there's Vanessa and all your friends and family saying, don't put up with this, Vanessa. Go on, here it goes again. Stick up for yourself, Vanessa. How do you park the two Vanessas that are in that argumentative or conflict situation where there's almost two sides wanting to be represented here?
Gosh, that's a really good question. And I think it's not easy, because in an ideal world, I think it would be really great if everyone showed up in life generally, actually, but in relationships where they're coming from a position of being pretty secure in themselves, in their own right. They know their worth, they know their value, they respect themselves, they understand their needs, they understand what behaviour is acceptable to them. If we all showed up like that, it would be amazing. I mean, generally in life, but unfortunately we don't. Not all coming from that perspective. What that means when you've got insecurities, you've got all the stuff that's come before in relationships where you haven't been listened to, or, you haven't stood up for yourself. All those things come. And so you actually are facing those situations. The more insecure you are within yourself, the more likely this other voice, the Vanessa, the other people, your history, your baggage, the other people in your life, the bigger that is going to probably play a role in your dialogue with your partner, I would say. The more secure we are as people in ourselves, and we know how to have a conversation, how to uphold boundaries. And I don't mean any of this in kind of a conflicting way, but just in conversation, the less effect this other stuff is going to have on our dialogue with our partner. So I would say that doesn't really answer your question in one way, but I would say if you are noticing that all these other people who have said, don't do that, don't let them get away with that, don't let her speak to you like that, you need to start saying this to her when she says that, all of that, if that is very loud for you and you're basing your communication with your partner mainly on this, I would say you want to be really aware of that, and then start actually reflecting on why is this so loud, and actually the me having the conversation much quieter. What is that saying about me? Why can I not just have the conversation I want to have based on my feelings, my views? And, yes, this can be useful, but it needs to be a bit quieter. So I think that's quite a good gauge of where you're coming from. If you feel quite loud in how you're presenting yourself, coming from a really pretty stable place, feeling quite safe and secure in the relationship, in yourself, feeling comfortable, being able to have conversations in your own right, from your perspective, this will be quieter. When this is really loud and is dominating the way you have dialogue with your partner, I think you need to definitely be aware of that and be quite reflective as to why. And that brings another dynamic into the relationship, because you're not really being true to yourself.
We're going to move now into prevention. And let's just say you've talked about all the ways that we can improve or try to be better with our communication, but perhaps you've just affirmed to yourself that actually I think that breakup is the reality, which, I'm a great believer that what we think we can then become true. So I would personally challenge as to whether or not that's even the right belief structure to have. If we're thinking about breakup, is it friends and family to go and talk about that with, or would you advocate going to a third-party specialist like yourself, Vanessa?
I would say both, actually. I'm a massive, massive advocate. If you are going through difficulties in any aspect of your life, actually, but if we're talking about relationships, and if you're on the verge of a breakup or you've just broken up with somebody, I would say having support around you is really, really key. And actually, that support can come from anyone. It can come from friends and family. It can come from work colleagues, someone you play tennis with that you don't maybe know that well, but actually you offload to them, maybe because you don't know them so well, but you see them regularly. Or it can be a professional like me. And I think there's no right or wrong, and there can be a combination of all of that, actually. I think it's really important because, we know ourselves, our mental health is so important. Breakups, heartbreak, divorce, all that stuff takes a massive toll on our mental health and well-being. And I mean, divorce itself is the second most traumatic life event we go through after death of a loved one. So that kind of puts it in context. But even if you're not getting divorced, heartbreak hurts. You feel it. And actually, by bottling all that up and having it all inside us and having no outlet to be able to talk, vent, look for options for yourself, what you do next, all that kind of thing, then it can be really, really difficult. It can take a real toll on us emotionally. It can really affect how we then react and what we do next. So I would say getting support, whoever you get it from, and it could be a combination of all. I think it's really interesting because sometimes friends and family are not the best source of advice or support. Example being, say your partner has an affair and you know about it, you find out about it, which is obviously very traumatic. If you are trying to work through that and you tell all of your friends and family about it, and essentially, obviously, they're going to come in support of you. So they'll be saying to you, oh, isn't she awful? God, how could you, terrible people. I've never liked them. They've always been awful. All this stuff comes out. Then you resolve and find a way through with that partner and you stay with them. But all your friends and family have basically been pouring out what they really think about your partner and all that kind of thing. Obviously, that is a really difficult situation to navigate further, and I've seen real rifts in families where that has happened, and then the people have got back together and often have lived happily, but it's caused actually a huge rift because the person is like, I never knew you thought that about them, or it can be very difficult. So I would say in those kinds of situations where there's something where it could be quite sensitive, sometimes that is better to just get help from a third party like me who's not emotionally involved. You can say what you like and you can work through it without the fear that if you get back together or you resolve the issues, there's going to be problems later on.
It's sage advice there, Vanessa. Thank you. Often you've talked about affairs, but there's other things that happen in life. Children come along for the first time, stressful job situations, even the stages of life, whether it be midlife, male infertility or menopause, post-menopause, a loss of a loved one in the family that's important. These are really massive events there. And that's sometimes where the fractures in a relationship become almost fissures. Where are you on that? Where one side of the partnership is perhaps suddenly feeling not loved, or they're no longer important, or their needs aren't being met, either physically or emotionally, and they suddenly want to have more from the relationship, but the other party can't give it because they're under stress, or their hormones are changing, or even their mindset's changing. How do we navigate through those difficult aspects of life that will come and hit all of us like waves?
Yeah, of course. That's the circle of life, isn't it? I would say one key word is patience. So actually practicing patience with your partner when they are going through a major life crisis or event. Again, understanding that those events can trigger different emotions and people react differently to different things. So being patient with each other as you navigate those feelings is really important. And also, if your partner is feeling a certain way, but you think, well, it wouldn't bother me. Why are you so upset? You wouldn't be so upset with that. That's not how we want to be dealing with our partner through things, because we all we all differ in how we get triggered by things, by what emotional events cause us bigger problems than somebody else. And so we want to be, even if we can't understand why it is affecting them so much, we must just accept that it is. So questioning and kind of essentially judging them for how they're reacting is not a good idea. We just need to accept at this point they are really struggling with this. Whether we would or not is kind of irrelevant. Open dialogue, back to that same thing. So if you're worried about your partner and what they're dealing with, and you maybe don't know what to say, see that in a wider context when say someone dies and people say, oh, I just didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. That can happen in partners. It's like, I don't know what to say to them. I want to just love them, but I don't know. So they keep quiet. And actually, even if you're just saying, are you okay? I love you. I'm here for you. Nothing else, but just keeping talking to them. Don't back off and shy away, because they need you more than ever to just be there. And it doesn't matter what you say. It's being there and saying something is what's important. I think, again, helping them kind of find a way forward in a calm way, because very often when someone is very, very emotional about something, we can't make good decisions. Our judgment is off very often. I mean, we know ourselves, and actually helping them calmly to find a way forward and help them to make some decisions can be really, really useful. So spending some time with them where they've maybe got to make some judgment calls, but are they're struggling, you with a bit of a more clear head can actually help them do that. And if you're in a family, in a busy home, share the responsibility. So practical things like that can show your partner that you're being understanding and empathetic, even if you're finding it hard to know what to say. So share more of the responsibilities, take some load off them on a practical level. That can be really, really important, because although you're not saying it, you're showing them, and that, makes a difference. And I would say keep humour in there, because even in the darkest times, you can still laugh, you can still actually have little jokes between each other, you can still try and share some nice times together, even when you're going through difficult things, or your partner is.
I don't know why, but I've got a record going around in my head, or a song. See, that's how old I am. Record. It's you say it best when you say nothing at all, but actually that can be really endearing if it's kind of a wink and a smile, that pat on the hand or something to show that you love them. But in those life stages, by saying nothing at all is back to the first part of our conversation, which was about an assumption. You're assuming you know how I'm feeling, but actually communicating how we truly feel is giving better service to the relationship.
Yes, I think there's a big tendency for people to sort of almost bury their heads in the sand and think this isn't going on, and I'm not going to address it because for whatever reason. But that can make people really anxious and stressful. And actually having clarity and being really specific about what's going on. You can ask really specific questions to your partner about how they're feeling or what's going on, or expressing yourself. But that's saying nothing where, because you're worried about upsetting them, or you're worried about the reaction, or you're worried about you might have got it wrong and misinterpreted something, or actually it is better to say something, and it is better to have a conversation. If we do that from a calm perspective, using I statements again rather than you, being really specific in what you're saying to them, and choosing the right time and the place, as we talked about earlier, in an understanding, compassionate way, that is better than just saying nothing. Because when people are going through stuff and there's no communication, verbal communication, people draw their own conclusions. Your partner will be noticing there's no communication, and they will be thinking, is it because they don't understand? Is it because they don't want to understand? Is it because they don't like what I'm doing? Is it because they don't like me? Is it? We draw our own conclusions. And I say that when couples are going through a divorce and there's children involved, or before, and people are like, oh no, the children don't know anything and we're just not going to tell them. And I'll say, they know something is going on. Even young children, they pick up your emotional cues, even if they don't understand them. And by saying nothing, the children are drawing their own conclusions. you know, be under no illusion that they will be making their own story. Very often it will be then, have I done something wrong? Do they not love me anymore? Things are going on, but they're not telling me. That must mean that I've done something really awful. That's the kind of scenarios we go into. And just by saying something that's appropriate, calm, it can be very simple, very straightforward. It takes that out of people's minds and they're like, okay, now I know. You can cope with it, because when you understand and you know something and you get some clarity, even if it's difficult, even if it is quite upsetting, you then can actually make some choices and move forward from there. But when you don't know, you're kind of really floundering in the dark.
Remember when you were just talking about that way of communicating? I think it was Brené Brown. I was listening to Brené Brown on a podcast, and I think she has a good relationship with her partner, and they have this battery level discussion, and they sort of wake up in the morning and one says, what's your battery level today? And one says kind of 40% and the other says 60%. And they sort of, what do you want some of my 10% to make us sort of 50% to make 100? And it's this sort of sense check of telling each other by way of a benchmark as to how close they're feeling to 100%, and then together they fuse to see how they can increase each other's battery levels. I like that sort of framework there of having some kind of system.
Yeah, that's really lovely, because that's on an emotional level, and that actually shows, sort of thinking of it in that way shows they've actually got quite a deep emotional connection. And, for a healthy relationship to progress and to survive and to go on, you need an emotional connection, an intimate connection emotionally, as well as an intimate connection physically with your partner. And, very often you can have one without the other. You see people who've got a good physical connection, but there's really not an intimate emotional connection at all. And you see people who have got an emotional connection, but they have no physical intimacy whatsoever. You see people in relationships like that all the time. And if both are happy with that, that's fine. Obviously, if you have a relationship where I've seen where there's neither, and people are staying in a relationship, they don't have a physical connection, they don't have an emotional connection, and that is very, very hard to maintain any kind of relationship, certainly not healthy. And ideally you want both. And that example you've just given shows that they have got a good emotional connection, because they're actually recognizing you're going to have peaks and troughs that are different from your partner's peaks and troughs, and actually they're trying to show they understand that and to be there for their partner, which is really important.
Vanessa, at the start of the conversation, you mentioned domestic abuse once and another time, and I think it would be a disservice to the audience for us not having an opportunity to talk about that. I'm certainly no specialist on this, and I know you are. Let's just say there's a listener that is male or female, having some kind of domestic abuse situation, be it physical or verbal. What would be your advice to that person by way of using their voice to communicate their strength to get themselves in a better position?
Gosh, thank you for raising it. I think, if there is somebody listening now who thinks they are in an abusive relationship, or certainly the behaviour they are receiving from their partner does not feel good to them. So even if they can't label it as this is domestic abuse, but they know they're walking on eggshells, they're frightened of speaking up, they've lost a lot of themselves, they're kind of withdrawing, they're being kept from family and friends, they don't have freedom to spend money, all sorts of things that can go on, and they're thinking, they recognise those kind of things and it doesn't feel good, then I urge people, it's not your fault. How somebody chooses to behave towards another person is on them. It is their choice. It's not ever because you've done something, said something, haven't done something, done too much of something. It's never your fault. They are making that choice. First thing to say. I would urge you, and I know this is not easy, but please seek some help. Tell somebody if you haven't. Talk to someone, even if it's just a sense check, to a friend. Think of someone you really, really trust and just have a conversation with them when it's calm, quiet, and just say to them, I just want to talk through some stuff that's going on, and I just want to know whether you think it's reasonable or not. And get someone else's opinion that you trust. From there, you can then do something, take the next step if you want to. But at least if you're not sure, if you feel pretty sure, and I would say talk to somebody again. If you kept it quiet, talk to anybody, a friend, a family member, a work colleague. Contact your local domestic abuse charity. All areas will have a local domestic abuse charity. You can search that. Most of them have a button, all of them have a button on their website. So if you're frightened of your partner seeing you searching for that, you can immediately press one button that is stop, and I don't think it shows up in your browser history. But look for advice, speak to them because they are experts. There is a brilliant charity called Mankind, which is a domestic abuse charity specifically for men as well. They do amazing work, and, obviously the statistics are at the moment 1 in 3 women, 1 in 6 men will undergo domestic abuse of some kind in their lifetime. Those are pretty stark statistics. So, you're not alone, and there is somebody to help you. And so seek some help initially, speak up and say something. If you are really frightened for your safety and or your children's, get out, get out somewhere because, obviously you've got to be safe. And if you really feel you are living in fear, then do what you can to get out and seek help. But there is always help, and it is not your fault. And I help people recover from those kind of relationships, help people work their way through that process as well as kind of being in it and helping them kind of understand and try and get out of it. So I'm always available to help people. You're not alone. I think you'll be surprised at the reception you get when you talk to someone about it.
But the channel at the end of the day is called Speak and Serve, and I think it's not just commercial context, but it's also how we speak through our voice and even through our fingertips to make sure that we use our voice as a position of strength. And Vanessa, if they were to reach out to you, what would be the website and the best way to do that in order for you to give them that counsel or advice?
Yeah, so my website is www.vanessawhite.co.uk, and on there you will see links to be able to reach out to me, to book an appointment with me. My email address is on there as well, so that's a good place to go. I am on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I'm on YouTube, I'm on LinkedIn, again Vanessa White, so you will find me, and again you can find ways of contacting me, or you can message me directly via those means. So yes, I'm quite easy to find if you want to.
Thank you. And I'll obviously put those details in the show notes. And I do like to end on, a positive. And we've really gone into the detail today about relationships. Of course, nothing's ever perfect, I don't think, in this life, but understanding that perfection can also lead to perfection is an understanding that it's worth spending time with. But what would be your 3 fundamentals, Vanessa, for leading a long, healthy life that is normally associated with good relationships too? What would be your 3 fundamentals, Vanessa?
I'm not an expert in long life, but I would say understanding your needs and values in life. So what really matters to you, and that is within a relationship too. So understanding this is what I need to be happy, and don't abandon your needs to stay in a relationship with someone or to try and get into a relationship with someone. Your needs are really important, and your values, and actually they should count above anything else, really. And so don't abandon those just to be in a relationship with somebody. I think fundamentally, if you feel scared, and I think I said this earlier, or unable to communicate with your partner or anyone actually in your life because you're scared of their reaction, or you think they may leave you, or you think they may not want to date you again, then you really need to think about that, because we should feel safe with people in whatever context to actually communicate our needs, our feelings, our emotions to them, and not be fearful. And I think that's really important, because I have lived where I couldn't do that. And so now for me, that is really fundamentally important and really quite liberating.
Understand your needs, feel safe. Anything else by way of just spend a long, healthy life?
I would say, for me, it's getting out in the fresh air and having time to think, to focus on me, to enjoy just being out, not having any kind of music or anything going on, but actually just thinking, looking around, which, you know, is probably a cliche and people say it all the time, but actually it can really reset things for me. So, you know, I work from home, I work for myself. So actually sometimes just even 10 minutes of just going out really just changes my whole thought process. And if I'm struggling on a piece of work, or I've got to have a difficult call, or I'm about to have a really heavy client call, just taking that breath before or after, or both if you can, actually really helps. So I think that is good for my mental health and it's good for my physical health.
Right, well, it's the depths of winter probably when they're listening to this. So let's get out there, wrap up nice and warm, find
Yeah,
yourself
wrap
a nice
up. I love
cozy
it in
mug.
the winter. Yeah.
Vanessa, I want to thank you. Do a great service to lots of people, and relationships. We all love to stay in a relationship forever, but it doesn't always finish that way. And I really want to appreciate you for guiding people to the storm and into calmer waters. And I know that you've done that for many, many people, and I know you'll do it for many, many more. So thank you very much for just being that little lighthouse in the storm somewhere.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. And honestly, it's been a pleasure coming on. Thank you so much for inviting me. I've loved talking to you.